Hey everybody, it's Crazy Daylight here, and today I'm talking about room acoustics. The reason this has come up is because I've just moved into a new studio and it doesn't sound as good as my old one, so I've had to have a bit of a think about how I can get it to sound better and immediately how I can just work with it so that I don't end up having like weird sounding mixes. The reason that that could happen is that the sound when you're working in your studio, listening to your speakers, is a combination of the direct sound going to your ears and then also the reflections that are bouncing around the room before they get to your ears, and it colours the sound. The room sound will um, quite often adversely affect what you're hearing and mean that the judgments that you're making about levels and that kind of thing of certain frequencies may be incorrect because you're listening to the room and not the actual not the actual speakers. Um, because sound bounces around the room a lot, I think the reason this room sounds worse than my old one is that the old one had a lot of windows in it, which was horrible for isolation if I was recording with a microphone or anything like that, but it was actually great for the frequency response of the room because the sound, especially the low frequencies, will just go straight out the window and not bounce around and not colour the sound. My current room has no windows, or it has one small one, and I think that's the major contributing factor. So if you're looking for a new studio and you're not going to be tracking live instruments or anything like that, then grab yourselves a room that has lots of windows, and then you won't have to do any acoustic treatment. So yeah, as I said, what you may be hearing is not actually what's coming out of the speakers. So knowing this can help you to make better judgments on your mix. And firstly, I'm going to talk about how you can, without acoustically treating your room, at least work with what you have if your room is a bit boomy or echoey or a bit peaky, how you can work with what you have to at least make, I suppose, educated judgments on the mix rather than just listening to what you're hearing and thinking, yep, that's what's going on in the mix. So how does it help? Well, if you have a room that is, say, has a massive peak at around 70 or 80, let's say 80 hertz, because that's one of the problems in my room, then when you play a bass note that has a like frequency around 80 hertz, that's going to sound loud, and you're going to be like, whoa, that note sounds whack. Maybe I need to EQ that 80 hertz out. But in reality, all you're hearing is a resonance in the room. And if you EQ out that 80 hertz when you go and play it on a speaker, particularly something outside where there's no resonances, or even in a different room, all of a sudden it's gonna have no grunt at that 80 hertz region because you've taken all of it out when you didn't need to. So let's just have a look at how you can use just simple tricks using Ableton or any DAW to at least work out what the problem areas in your room are. I've just loaded an operator into Ableton here, and I'm using it to get some sine wave tones happening, and they're just going to be quick impulses. And you want them to be about a 30-second in length if you just keep it at the standard 120 BPM tempo. I think that working out the low end of the frequency spectrum is a good place to start, because in a room that's the part that's most likely to have issues. That bass tends to build up the most in especially in small rooms. I've already done this, so I know that one of the problem frequencies in this room is D sharp 1, and because room modes work similar to sympathetic resonances in music and that kind of thing, if D is a fundamental mode or peak in the frequency spectrum in your room, then the fourth and the fifth degrees of the scale up there are also going to be fairly strongly sympathetic modes, and so are octaves. Coincidentally, a tritone or a minor third or something like that it doesn't have a strong mathematical correlation to that fundamental note will be weaker notes. So what I'm going to do right now is I'll put in a tritone note here, and we can have a listen to the difference in those two sounds. I'm also going to record that at the same time as I play it back so that we can also visually assess what's going on there. I can hear people walking around upstairs, don't worry about that. This microphone's wound up pretty high so that it can hear the sound of the room, so you might get a bit of that throughout this tutorial. I'll try and play these notes at a time when there's not footsteps clomping around, and I think we are good to go. Oops, I was talking through that one. I might just do that again. Okay, so hopefully you guys can hear at the other end that there's some resonance going on there. This D sharp note sounds a lot longer, the decay is a lot longer than the A note, and it also sounds a bit louder. So this is kind of like listening to I guess maybe a filtered tom-tom drum, whereas that's more similar to I guess the bottom end of a nice tight punchy kick drum. We can clarify that by looking at the waveforms which I just recorded, and obviously looking at that you can see there's a fair bit of difference. Those two notes are the exact same duration, but if I take this and move it down below, the actual the recorded duration of the note is almost double that of what this this higher note is. So what does that mean? Well, our ears perceive sound via RMS, root mean squared levels, which means that if there's more decay on a sound like this, the sound goes for slightly longer, so that's one contributing factor to the sound appearing louder to our ears. There's also the fact that for sine waves, or waves in particular, when they act in a room and they are at a frequency that it's going to sum in that room, they will also appear louder. If you want to understand a bit more about that, then look up phase cancellation and how that works. But essentially there's a positive and negative portion of each waveform, and if two waveforms align positively then it'll get louder, and then if positive and negative align it'll actually cancel out and make it quieter. So with this D sharp note, that is summing, positive summing, and this is negative summing, which is making it quieter and have less decay. Alright, so using notes like that is a great way to be able to assess what's happening with all your tuned instruments, all of your synths and that kind of thing. Obviously if I was writing a bass line right now and I had these two notes in there, I'd be thinking, gee, that A note sounds so weak, and if I wasn't considering what the room is doing right now, I'd probably go and put a boost up around whatever frequency that A note is. So that's when having a MIDI note frequency chart comes in handy. I'm just going to go online, there's loads of these available, and I'll find one that is suitable for us to take a look at. Where's my typing skills going today? Frequency MIDI chart. And go to images. And I've looked at this one before and it seemed fairly coherent, so I will just take that. Can I drag it straight out of here? Nope, I can't. I've only just started using Chrome, so how do I open picture? Open image in new tab, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, so now I've got that. From memory of looking at this chart last time, what it considers to be D1, I think, is actually D2 on this MIDI chart. There must be some sort of different understandings in the world about what number octaves are, but I know that the D that I am actually, well, they're calling it E flat here, the E flat that I've been playing with is the 77.7 Hertz frequency spectrum. I mean, if you want to check that, you can get this span plugin. It's, oh, maybe I don't have it on here. It's something that I have on my desktop. I'm doing this on my laptop right now. But there is a Waves plugin as well. It's called Paz. So we'll just put a Paz frequency on there and check out the frequency of this note. Alright, looking at that, and these things aren't terribly accurate, but it's come up at about 62 Hertz. I'm not sure why it's come up at that. That's why I like to use the span one, because it's actually a bit more accurate. But it's definitely a D sharp note, and if you look here, you got 77. The next D sharp down here is 34, so it's definitely the 77 Hertz note. So once you've got that established, now you know what notes you're working with. You can use these charts to assess, well, I'm mixing down my bass line and a certain note sounds weak. If you actually wanted to, I think I'm going to do this until I get my frequency, get my room treated. I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to actually print this chart out and perhaps draw some kind of representation on here of which notes are going to be loud, because it's going to form a bit of a curve to some degree. You'll find that from the D here, it's kind of going to go, that's going to be the peak, and then it's just going to get quieter up to the A, and then it'll start to get louder again as the resonances start to get closer to that D, which is one of the fundamental modes in my room. So that's a good thing to do. The other thing you can do, which is going beyond just looking at notes, and it's a more precise way if you're actually going to be sort of testing the acoustics of your room to do treatments and that kind of thing, you would be better off to use just a sort of varied frequency sine wave that's not tuned to any specific frequency, because the fundamental frequencies in this room are not actually 77.7. That's the tuned fundamental, the closest tuned fundamental, but it's actually 80 Hertz is the proper fundamental if you want to be specific. So if you want to test more specifically like that, just get your operator and turn off these ones. I don't think that makes any difference, but what you need to do is turn off the pitch tracking. So that should be, where is it? I've lost it. Oh no, that's right. You just hit this fix button, and once you've done that, you need to make sure this is on a multiple of 1, so that it means that frequency directly corresponds to what you're hearing. It's not being modulated at all by another sine wave or anything like that. And then what it means is any notes that you sound will correspond to the frequency that's being that's on the knob there. So if you're sort of feeling a bit unsure, maybe you're not confident using your ears to judge that sort of thing, another cool thing to do is look up a room mode calculator. Now, I didn't really explain too much about what room modes are, and I probably don't need to, because there is this room mode calculator that I'm going to show you. We want metric, unless you work in feet. I think if you leave the metric bit off, then it will automatically just give you one that uses feet. And I think this is the one that I used. So I mean, the most obvious room modes are the axial ones. Doesn't really give you much of a description about them here, but essentially they are modes that either go from this wall to that wall, roof to floor, or the back wall to the front wall. Essentially parallel walls summing frequencies. And if you have a frequency that has a wavelength that runs from one wall to the other, then that is going to be a mode. Or if it is a wavelength that is double the length of the room, then that will be the lowest possible mode. So that means that you've got, a sine wave kind of goes in a up then down thing. So if just the up part goes from here to there, and then where it I suppose passes the zero crossing and becomes the negative part of the waveform and goes down under like that, that half of the frequency wavelength can also be a mode. But you can read more about that. I probably didn't explain that great, but there's a lot of stuff on the web about that. So let's just punch in the figures for my room. So what you're looking at here is just the measurements of your room. It's pretty simple. I measured my room before, so I know that the wall lengths are 4.3 by 2.8. Actually, I think that's the roof that's 2.8, and then 2.3 is the other. It doesn't matter if you mix those up, they're still going to give you roughly the same response, I think. least for what you're going to hear. Maybe if you were planning to treat stuff, you might do it differently, but right now that works. And we hit calculate. Now you've got to make sure that you're not putting feet in here as well, or you'll get something that's inaccurate. So we calculate the room modes, and like I said before, we've got that fundamental that is 80 Hertz, and that is, because it's close to 70, you're going to still get a fairly strong resonance from 77.7, and that's why we were hearing that D sharp note resonating so strongly. If you use the just the frequency dependent, not the tuned sine waves, then if you bumped it up to 80, you might hear a slight difference, but that 80 Hertz and 77, it's kind of in between notes. So, sorry, the 77 is in between 80 and, yeah, I'm not even sure what I'm trying to say there, don't worry. So, yeah, punch in your room dimensions and check out the room modes. That way you can clarify that what you're hearing is what's actually going on in the room. And these modes are going to go like up through the frequency spectrum. I think once you get to about 2K, the modes become less prominent. They just get so well dispersed around the room that it's more difficult to kind of get them summing with each other because it's a smaller wavelength. So it's mostly these lower frequencies you want to hear. In fact, you'd want to check into that. I'm not sure where the cutoff for really needing to focus on the modes is. So that basically gives you an idea of how you can use the knowledge of modes and what's happening in your room to at least make a better assessment of what you're hearing from your speakers and not be mixing to the sound of your room so much. If your room does sound like crap, like mine does, I'd suggest that you think about doing some treatment, because it is quite painful having to, think about what frequencies are peaking in the room and that kind of thing. In an ideal environment, you can just listen, you think, yep, that sounds in place, and know that it actually is in place. I'm going to do some acoustic treatment on this room over the next month or so when I get the time. So I will get back to you guys with another tutorial and show you what I did to treat the room, and we can have a listen and see if it's actually worked, see if it's made a difference. The main thing that I'm really wanting to do, apart from have it sort of a more coherent assessment of the sound that I'm listening to when I'm producing, is also just make the listening environment more comfortable. Right now I'm in an empty room, so there's reflections going everywhere, but what I noticed is it's quite bizarre. When I'm sitting in front of the speakers, they sound a bit murky, they sound a bit smeared, there's lots of reflections going on. And if I leave the music going and walk out the door of my room, the mids actually sound clearer out there because they're not being subjected to the horrible resonances in this room. So that's another good way to test if your room sucks ass like mine does, is just walk outside the door, and if it sounds clearer outside, then you know that you probably need something to do. I'm going to wrap it up there, so thanks for listening, watching rather. If you guys have any questions, hit me up, and stay tuned for the next installment when I've actually done the treatment, and we can see how that goes. Big ups.